Let me read a little bit from this article from NBC News, and then we'll talk about it. NBC reports China proposes teaching masculinity to boys as state is alarmed by changing gender roles. Boys in China traditionally are expected to be strong leaders, get good grades, and excel at sports. But the gender balance in China is changing. They start with this, like, I hate when journalists do, they start with a story. No one invited Bu Yunhao to be in their group for the annual class trip. The other fifth graders at Shanghai Shangdi Experimental School made fun of the 11-year-old, calling him too girly. Quote, I wanted to run away, right out of the classroom, said Yunhao, now 13 and a first-year middle schooler in Shanghai. Some of his classmates made fun of his high-pitched voice and the way he screamed when he tried to maintain discipline among his fellow students as a class monitor. Others teased him for spending so much time with the girls and said he acted like he was trying to date the other boys in the class. The bullying eventually stopped, but a recent announcement by the government that singles out boys who don't fit traditional Chinese ideas of masculinity has revived the painful memories. The plan to, quote, encourage masculinity in male students has inflamed a debate over modern gender roles as China's government increasingly emphasizes what many consider to be outdated and damaging stereotypes for men and boys. I think it's interesting because that perspective is wholly American. Like in America, it's very much, I'm reading the story and it's like, if that happened now, there would be a PSA. They'd bring in bully experts and they'd say, no, it's okay that he's effeminate and things like that. But it also reminds me of that commercial that we saw out of China a while ago where they put the black man in the washing machine and he comes out as Chinese. People in the United States were outraged. How dare you? You're so racist. People in China laughed and didn't seem to care at all. So I wonder what your guys' thought. I don't know, whoever wants to jump in about the gender roles in China and what you guys think is happening.
Well, one thing that jumps to mind is, back in the Cultural Revolution, it was sort of the opposite, where they were making an effort to like completely eliminate any kind of gender. Like the women had to dress in almost like military attire, very baggy, had to have short haircuts. Any kind of display of femininity was not allowed. And now
similar now, I guess, right?
Well, I think the women are allowed to be and encouraged, and that reminds me of the guy who was found out to have 100 mistresses. I think he wanted them to be very feminine still. He got executed, by the way.
Jeez, wow.
Well, that escalated quickly.
It did.
Well, I mean, there's also a lot of corruption, so it wasn't just that.
It was also the 3 metric tons of cash they found in his home.
Okay.
Yeah,
I thought it was like a guy who was like, I want a bunch of women, off with his head.
No
Nice.
word on what happened
I
to the
believe
women.
it, though.
Yeah. I don't know where the mistresses are. But yeah, Shelley, you made a good point about sort of the influence of South Korea on China.
Yeah, I think the thing is that with the growing like K-pop, K-dramas, like this whole Korean wave coming, and like there has been kind of more like a more effeminate kind of male has been like the ideal in movies and music and all this stuff, and it's affected China a lot. And in response, the Chinese Communist Party tried to basically have their own like patriotic boy bands and
patriotic. They love that word.
Yeah, and then it didn't quite work well. But they're trying to like basically use like Chinese culture to fight this like incoming Korean like popular culture that they didn't like. And then you've also got this. So like in Chinese, the word for like the type of like effeminate like male, like these like really pretty young men is called like small soft meat, like small tender meat. You know,
right.
So that's become like super hot. And then the Chinese Communist Party is like, that's not masculine enough. Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party is making movies like Wolf Warrior, right? Like they want like the Chinese Rambo.
It's really weird though. I mean, they're communist, and then in the United States, the right criticizes all of this stuff by saying those trying to strip away masculinity are communist, right? So we had Jack Murphy on the show recently, and he went he went on this tirade about Marxism is inherently anti-masculine because they want to get rid of the patriarchy and things like that. But how does that make sense that the Communist Party of China wants strong, burly, masculine men, and they're literally the Communist Party? It's like...
Well, there are different tactics to communism, and in a communist country like China, they want a big, fearsome military that intimidates other countries. China is definitely gearing up for the day they invade Taiwan. They've been very open about wanting to invade Taiwan. They've said this for decades, and so I think this is partially a response to like creating an image internationally of like this is a fearsome military force that will be able to take Taiwan. Don't mess with it in the South China Sea.
But does this have anything to do with what's happening in the U.S.? Are they responding to what's happening here? I know you guys mentioned Korea, right? Mm-hmm. Isn't a lot of what happens in Korea related to, they want to sell to America. They like the culture that America exports. They try to adopt certain things like that. Like boy bands weren't invented in Korea.
Yeah,
I don't know if they were invented here in America, mind you. I don't know.
Well, K-pop, they definitely were obviously inspired by the American music industry, but I think they've been fairly unsuccessful at really penetrating the U.S. market outside of
BTS,
BTS or like Gangnam
yeah.
Style, which was
but Psy isn't like a real.
He's not the typical. He's not BTS.
Right. He's not a serious. It's like very hokey and silly, and like he's making fun of it, kind of.
Yeah. So I don't know. You can say that that Korean style is appealing to the U.S. because it really hasn't done that yet.
Yeah.
Even though there's a lot of good K-pop out there.
No, but I mean, like, is Korea trying to be like the U.S. in terms of how pop culture works? Right. They're emulating. A lot of countries do this. America has some kind of pop culture phenomenon, and then they emulate it. I mean, we emulate a bit of the British stuff too when we've had various different artists come from the UK. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering if China's reaction to this and the things they're doing is countering the United States, right? Like I was saying about the communist thing, they're looking at are they looking at the U.S. and being like, we're going to do the opposite of what the U.S. is because the U.S. is bad? How tribalism works.
I actually think they're kind of trying to do the same thing that the U.S. did, but in like the 80s. Like they want to use, soft power to project, like the way that, American Blue Jeans or I brought up Rambo, right? Like U.S. or Top Gun, like these type of like movies that like celebrated.
They
like,
love Top Gun in China.
Like this kind of masculinity, that kind of like power, like that appeals to the Communist Party because that seems like it's like, oh, then you have the power to like Wolf Warrior was about, these Chinese soldiers who went to rescue Chinese citizens who were, in Africa, right? So like they were, the whole idea was like the motherland will never leave you behind. Like it was this like whole like very patriotic.
Yeah, it's like 80s.
Yeah.
And the whole idea like the Communist Party uses the propaganda of the century of humiliation constantly. The idea that foreign forces have humiliated the West, and so China needs to be strong. We need to be strong and fight against the hostile foreign forces. So,
what do you think the sentiment among the Chinese people is, though? I mean, it doesn't really sound like the Communist Party is communist.
That's a big conversation there.
So, there's a lot of elements to communism, and a lot of people think, oh, communism is about the government says, here's what products have to be made and who does what jobs, right? And I think that's true, but that's only at 5% of what communism is. Ultimately, communism is about power and control for the Communist Party. And so they'll use these ideas of creating a utopia on Earth, and you know how it goes. It ends up, they promise equity, they promise equality, and ultimately, some animals are a lot more equal than others. Right. That is the leadership of the party. What we see in China is there's a lot of capitalism going on in the sense you have a lot of private industry now, and you have in the last 40 plus years since the Kaifang, the reform and opening up started in 1978. Huge explosion in private industries. But the reason China is still completely a communist country is, number one, the Communist Party actually controls all those private industries. So you've got, Alibaba, the Dalian Wanda, the film company. Any company has to have a Communist Party branch in the company that's even funded by a company, and they're involved in big decisions that are happening in the company. In fact, even foreign companies that go into China, like McDonald's, IKEA, they all have party cells in the country by law. They have to have party cells in the company. And so there's that control of private industry. On top of that, you've got some of the biggest industries in China that are directly state-owned enterprises: steel, coal, telecommunications, some of the construction. So that element is communist. And then on top of that, you've got the sort of communist legal system, which is that they don't have the kind of legal system we think of here. You've got obviously the rubber stamp Congress, but you also have the way that they rule is not through rule of law. they rule through these mass political campaigns, which is, a whole other topic. But like, simply put, Xi Jinping will say something like, we need to improve the quality of public toilets in China. And then like everyone in China has to get involved in like sprucing up these things. And some local officials go nuts and they build these like, $1 million golden toilets, for foreigners. Look how great we're following this policy, but it's a political campaign. Private companies have to do it, local officials, and you get promoted based on how well you follow the policy. And even if the policy is ludicrous, or even if you take it to an extreme, that doesn't matter, because you're, as a local official, you're not accountable to voters. You're accountable only to the higher ups who are giving you your position. So in that sense, it's still completely communist, even though it seems to have the elements of capitalism.
Who was it? Michael Bloomberg, who said something about how Xi Jinping has constituents he has to.
Oh, he's not a dictator, right?
Yeah,
he's not a dictator. Yeah, all right.
So he doesn't. You say he doesn't have voters. Michael Bloomberg disagrees, sort of. I mean, is there a possibility that if the people are upset, Xi Jinping will not be in power?
Well, let's ask the Uyghurs.
I don't think that but there is this, this whole populism versus the elites thing that's happening basically all around the world. In China, the Communist Party is like uniquely positioned to take advantage of it because they're a communist party. So they already say, it's the people's this, the people's that. But Xi Jinping has specifically made an attempt to be a populist leader within the Communist Party even. So he'll do things like his anti-corruption campaign, which was really about kind of getting rid of his political enemies, but a lot of it was positioned as like, we're getting rid of like the excessive like elite communist members who are just wasting money and drinking and having mistresses and this kind of stuff. And then he'll be photographed eating steamed buns at an ordinary restaurant with the common people, or these kind of like very.
He's a guy you could have a baijiu with.
Yeah, like he's a guy you could eat a steamed bun with. It's like very like Maoist in that way, where it's like man of the people type of propaganda. So he's making a specific play to become the populist leader. I think probably partly because of the power struggle that's going on within the party.
Yeah,
so he kind of understands that he needs to have the ordinary people on his side, quote unquote. Yeah.
Well, that's what drove the Cultural Revolution. Mao was kind of on the outs. He used the love of the people, particularly the psychotic young youth, activated them, and then he was back in power, basically. So it's powerful.
Do regular people in China like, generally speaking, the Communist Party or Xi Jinping?
Well, they'll certainly say so publicly. It's hard to really know what the opinion is, because there is no forum that they can really... Actually, Clubhouse was kind of an interesting example of maybe some signs of dissent. Like Clubhouse, there were Mandarin language chat rooms that would very, very quickly fill up to their 5,000 person max capacity. And this was for a very brief window. I think it was only about a week or so. The Clubhouse...
No, it's less. It was a weekend. It was a weekend before they shut it down.
It was just this little bit of crack where people inside mainland China could have actual uncensored access to the outside world.
Wow.
And they were talking about Xinjiang and the Uyghurs and the concentration camps and all this stuff.
They were hearing from Uyghurs. They were hearing from people in Hong Kong and Taiwan. And so I think that's a sign that people in China are aware on some level that they are being starved of information, and they're going for it.
But also people on Clubhouse, you're talking about, wealthy Chinese people or upper middle class Chinese people who have
rural farmers.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, my experience mainly with overseas Chinese people is that they've generally been seem to be positive towards the Communist Party, and I think that's a lot of times because you have a very small subset of people that end up making it to the United States, and the reason they got their wealth so they could come here is actually because they had connections within the party, and many of them were party members themselves. And so you've got a very small and non-representative subset of wealthy or influential overseas Chinese who are saying, we like the Communist Party, or they'll say, oh, maybe there's a few issues, but basically it's been really good for China.
Well, you're talking about the people who have come here within the last 10 years.
The last 10 years, right? And so, but then you have if what you're really talking about is the other 1.3 billion Chinese people, you may have a very different perspective. And I remember, Shelley, when you were talking with blind Chinese rights lawyer Chen Guangcheng about what was on the ground in China.
Yeah, and he talked about how, many people are very fed up with the Chinese Communist Party. They just cannot express it online because they know. I mean, people have been arrested in China for calling Xi Jinping a steam bun, for example.
Or Winnie the Pooh, right?
Yeah. So it's not a joke that like people are seriously getting in trouble for what they say online.
Yeah, well, it's happening here now, just in different ways. I think it's interesting how we've basically just outsourced censorship, very different from what they do. I mean, for them, it's the Communist Party that dictates the censorship, right? Mm-hmm. Here, it's just, we can't interfere with what the monopoly wants. So now you look at how all the conversations here are being controlled. It seems like there are parallels, not completely identical, but still similarities where people are getting, it's getting worse and worse here.
Well, Tim, they're private companies. They have the right to, monitor their own businesses.
Don't you support billion-dollar conglomerates like Google?
See, that's the issue. It's always the centralized power. If we give all the power to the government, you'll end up with a similar problem. However, we have a Bill of Rights in this country, so there's at least that to protect us in the event that in the U.S. we say, okay, we're going to nationalize or regulate these companies. But you'll still run the risk, no matter what the supreme power is, the centralized, unified authority, no matter what it is, it's going to tell you can't do things it doesn't like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the foundation of the United States is the idea that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So it's a system in place to prevent the elite from getting too much power, because what always happens is the people who become elite think they should have more power and have a general disdain for all of us other schlubs.
Yeah.
But they know better than us, Chris. Shouldn't we let them tell us what to do and what to think?
My problem with the elite is they don't recognize that I should be amongst them.
Yeah, right?
That's fair, yeah.
Right.
Jerks.
I know. I have a very high IQ, I'm sure.
My mom told me.
Yes.
Yeah, well,
My mom.
to a certain extent, I mean, the Communist Party is just the elite. The people who choose to join it, they're doing so because they know they will get the elite ranks, the privilege, the access.
They use the same line that communism has used all along, that there's class struggle. The world would be a better place if there weren't this group oppressing everyone else. And so they are the people. And then they kill everyone. They kill the bad people and then take over. And then obviously, since they're the good guys, they can do whatever they want, and everyone has to.
That's right.
Mow the line. And it's hard when you get into power on the premise that you're fighting those in power, because then you don't want people to fight the power when you become the power.
Right. Well, then they just have to come up with like a group to target. Right. So, you target the students in 1989 and they become the pariahs and you massacre them.
There's always some enemy to fight.
Thanks for checking out this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. If you want to see the full show, come back to this channel, youtube.com/TimcastIRL, Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., where you can leave comments and super chat, and we actually will read your comments on the show. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and if you want exclusive members-only content, segments you can't get anywhere else, go to timcast.com, become a member, and we even have full bonus episodes. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.